Hello and welcome to another episode on the Everyday Joy podcast. This is episode 95. I'm your host, Joy Ravella, and today we talk about being bold, being strong, being courageous, especially when you need to enter a space that you're not necessarily comfortable in, or a space that you've been out of for a long time. In fact, Jo shares a story today around re-entering the workforce after taking a lot of time off to raise her children. And I think we can all relate to some of the things she talks about. Now, if you right now are in that space, you've started a new chapter, maybe a new study, or you're moving house, or you've got something big or new on the horizon, I think you'll definitely get a lot out of today's episode. If you're not in that space, well, hold on to these nuggets of truth, because life has a funny way of constantly bringing us to moments where we have to step outside of our comfort zones and be bold and be courageous. Speaking of, let's get into today's Bible verse.
Be bold and strong. Banish fear and doubt. Remember, your God is with you wherever you go. That's found in Joshua chapter 1 verse 9 in the TLB Bible.
Jo Chapman, once again, so good to have you here in the studio.
Thank you so much. I'm always thrilled. It's a real blessing. Thanks, Joy.
Well, one of the things I know that a lot of listeners love about you is how you share different chapters of your life. And you've got so many chapters, including one I really want to dive into at a later episode, is you lived in India for like 9 months.
Yes. Yes, I'm full of surprises.
Yes, you've got lots of stories. And today, one of the stories we are going to dive into a little bit later is re-entering the workforce after having children.
Yep.
So before we get into that, Jo, what is your first impression of today's verse?
I always think of God wanting us to be amazing warriors and really just fanning the flame of courage like you would as a mum as your child is doing a concert or going to school sports. You're going to do this. You can make this. Be strong. And, so I just think of God just cheering us on and giving us courage, boosting our confidence and just believing in us whatever we do.
That's so good, Jo. I think for me, this one, I remember learning it at Sunday school.
Yes.
And there was a song that was Be Strong and Courageous. And I think I've got this
so good.
It's like drilled into me.
Yeah.
But I am so glad that it's one of those verses that I can just take out of my back pocket whenever I do feel scared. Because what this verse reminds me is that it's not so much my skills, my ability. It ends in saying, remember, your God is with you wherever you go.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons why I personally love this verse, is it gives me courage at times when I don't feel very courageous, but the courage doesn't come from my abilities or what I can bring. It's reminding me who's with me.
Exactly.
So
it's
I love
powerful.
this. Yeah, it's such a good one. What has this verse told you about who God is or what matters to him?
It matters to God that we are encouraged and that we are inspired. I think he's telling us that exactly what you just said, that no matter where you go, what you do, you're not alone, and that we don't have to rely only on our skills or our talents or our mindset, because as you said, when we partner with God, we're more than we hoped for.
Yeah. And you had a period in your life where this verse really came alive for you. So let's rewind back to you. You had 4 kids, 11, 9, 7, 4.
Yes.
And you felt very strongly that it was time for you to re-enter the workforce. What was that like? What were the fears? What were the pressures? What were the joys around that time?
Yeah. If I can start by saying when my husband left and walked out, I think being bold and courageous, like the scripture says, banishing fear starts with a decision, not a feeling. So I said to myself, I do not want to be an average divorcee, and I don't mean that with any insult to anybody, but I mean it in the sense of falling into the traps of, self-deprecation, being immobilized, overwhelmed with rejection and fear and sadness. Although I did feel all of those things, I said to God, please allow me to rise up with power and cause me to be bold and courageous. Now, when you pray something like that, you can bet your bottom dollar that you're going to have to do something like that. And so it was exactly that. When I was only about 4 months after my ex had left the home, we weren't divorced, but it was pretty bad. And I had exactly those children, 11 down to 4. And I just thought, I'm going to go back to work so that I can be in a community, so that I can start to have independence, so that I can feel a sense of worth and being able to contribute.
Yeah.
Not that I wasn't doing that as a mum, but just personally for me, something developmental for me. And so I sent a resume and started working. When I left the workforce, I was 31. So I left the workforce at 31, having had my second child. When I re-entered the workforce, I was 42. So nearly
11 years.
11 years.
Yeah.
11 years that I had not been in a professional workplace. So I had a great fear of technology. How am I going to know what technology has done in the workplace? Obviously, I'd caught up personally in emails and all those sorts of...
But things do change. You need updates every 3 minutes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Databases and, all of those things. So I had a lot of fear around how am I going to know how to do things technologically in my job. And also, what do people do now? What do they wear? Will I have the confidence? I'm older now, a lot older, and just a lot of fear around that. Another area I had fear was I have 4 small children. So what I used to do is I came here and I work at 89.9 The Light. Back then I worked in fundraising and relationship management, and I started off with a very junior role, part-time, so that I took my kids to school and I came into work and I was able to pick up my children from school and keep working from home. So thank goodness, workplaces are flexible. And I'd work at home and cook dinner and do homework and look after everything. But the thing is, God empowers you. And I actually felt empowered by doing something for me. Because at the time I didn't need the money. My ex-husband was still paying. It was early days. But I did it for my self-development. I did it for my sense of self, for a community, and for being a better balanced mum for the children rather than focused in the depths of despair of divorce.
And I think there are times in our lives where this verse really comes alive. Maybe you've got to be strong and courageous, and you're listening right now and you've got to be strong and courageous because you have no other choice. Maybe for you, your story aligns more with Joe because you're choosing to do this thing because you know that it's going to be good for you. And wherever along that spectrum you are, the beauty of it is that God is right there with you. So Joe, for you, when you were re-entering that workforce, you talked about all sorts of different fears and anxieties, so much new, which by the way is physically exhausting.
Yeah.
Having a whole new rhythm and routine can exhaust you physically. So on basically every single level, you've had a lot of change. You've had to be bold and brave in many areas.
Yeah.
So how is God with you in those times?
As you explain that, I think to myself, what was I doing? The thing is, I was going through separation and divorce. It was very early days. Yeah, very small children entering the workforce after 10, 11 years. But I think you realise when you step out, whether it's in, compulsion because you have to, no choice, which I had no choice with divorce. I did have a choice to go to work, but still I wanted to do something different. In all of these areas, you realise that God empowers you and lifts you up. And God is with you wherever you go. And it's exciting to be bold and strong because when I don't feel it, doesn't mean God's not going to add what I don't have. And it's like stepping out. You see that you're safe when you put your toe in the water. You say, oh, it's okay, I can do this. Then you put your foot in the water and you say, I'm still okay. I'm still alive. Then you go to your knees and you say, wow, this is kind of feeling good. You don't, necessarily have to jump in. You just have to do the next thing. Being bold is taking one step. Being courageous is taking that one step, although you're frightened. And what you realize is that you're swimming. After a while, you're swimming. But you know what? It's like you're swimming with floaties. God is the ring around you. God is the thing that upholds you. God is the buoyancy when you feel like you're drowning. And you know what? I'm going to say this because you know me, if you've listened to me in other podcasts or on 89.9 The Light. Take a courageous step because it's an adventurous life, and God will never let you down. Even when you feel like you're falling, He is there. And you know what? If I didn't take that step of boldness to go back into the workforce, I would never, ever be speaking to you on this podcast. So you know what? I could never see today what God had in store for me tomorrow. When I was back there at 41 entering the workforce, I had no idea what was ahead of me. I just took a step to be bold and courageous, and God knew the plans that He had for me. So you don't know what lies behind your one step of courageous activity. So I say, trust God. It's worth it.
As we wrap up today's episode, I really want to encourage you, if you are someone who's facing a new opportunity, a new chapter, or something in your life right now that's causing you to feel fearful, to do two things. Number one, remember who is with you. Take the focus off yourself, off your abilities or inabilities, off anything that you can control, and instead choose to focus on who God is and the fact that He's never going to leave you. And maybe for you, that's all you need to do today in order to gain that courage. An extra for experts is to simply ask yourself, what is my next step? What's the next thing I can do? Without projecting too far down into the future and getting stressed out about the whole thing, just ask yourself, okay, what's the next thing I can do? Is it sending an email? Is it booking in an appointment time? Is it having a conversation? Is it just turning up? Is it just putting on my shoes and getting out the door? I'm not sure what it is for you, but what could that next step look like? As Joe was saying, life is an adventure with God. And what's an adventure without some unknowns? The good thing, though, is that there is always one known, and that known is that God is always in control. He always will love you and want the best for you, and He promises to be with you always. Joshua 1:9, be strong and courageous, do not be terrified, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. I hope you enjoyed today's episode on the Everyday Joy podcast. Thank you to everyone who's been leaving amazing written 5-star reviews. Our audience is growing, it's becoming more global, and I just want to welcome anyone who's listening from outside of Australia. Would love to know where you're from, what you're up to, what episodes you enjoy, and if you'd like to get in touch, the inbox address for the Everyday Joy podcast is in the description below. Look forward to catching up again tomorrow.